Ma'am, step away from the vehicle right now. The command cut through the humid Georgia afternoon so sharply that conversations around the gas station stopped mid-sentence. A teenager carrying a fountain drink froze beside the entrance. A truck driver halfway through pumping diesel looked over his shoulder. Even the soft buzz of traffic beyond the intersection seemed to fade beneath the sudden tension gathering beneath the bright canopy lights. Evelyn Carter slowly turned from the open rear hatch of her aging dark blue SUV. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look angry. She simply looked confused. At 38 years old, Evelyn carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who spent every weekday standing in front of a classroom full of children. Her brown cardigan moved gently in the warm breeze. Her wedding ring caught a flash of sunlight as she lowered her hand from the cargo area. Behind her, inside the vehicle, sat a carefully secured wooden case draped with a folded American flag. The box was old but polished. Important somehow. Yet nobody standing there knew why. Sergeant Daniel Rhodes noticed it immediately. His eyes narrowed. Years of police work had trained him to trust instinct before explanations. And right now, every instinct in his body was telling him something was wrong. Step away from the vehicle, he repeated. Now. Several customers exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn complied without argument. She took 3 small steps backward and folded her hands in front of her. The movement was calm, almost graceful. That calmness irritated Daniel more than he wanted to admit. Most people questioned him. Most people demanded answers. This woman simply stood there, watching him with steady eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Her voice was soft, professional, the voice of someone used to solving problems without raising it. Daniel ignored the question. His attention remained fixed on the flag-covered case. 2 patrol vehicles sat nearby with emergency lights flashing silently across the concrete. Blue reflections rolled across fuel pumps and storefront windows. More people were watching now. Phones appeared. Cameras pointed, discreetly from different angles. Evelyn noticed them, but said nothing. She had experienced enough uncomfortable public moments to recognize the feeling immediately. The assumptions, the whispers, the curious stares. Daniel stepped closer to the SUV. "What's inside the box?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated for only a second. "Personal property." "What kind of personal property?" "Something that needs to reach Fort Stewart today." The answer only deepened the crease between his eyebrows. Fort Stewart. Military. Government. Important. Or maybe that was exactly what she wanted him to think. Daniel had spent nearly 20 years dealing with people who hid the truth behind official-sounding explanations. He wasn't about to be fooled now. "Open it," he said. Evelyn's expression changed slightly. Not fear. Not panic. Concern. "I'm not authorized to do that here." Several heads turned. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Daniel crossed his arms. "You're not authorized?" "No, sir." "Then who is?" Evelyn looked directly at him. "Military officials at the receiving location." The crowd murmured quietly. Daniel felt every eye settling on him. He hated uncertainty. He hated situations where he didn't immediately control the narrative. Most of all, he hated feeling as though someone knew more than he did. The afternoon sun dipped behind a passing cloud, casting the station in softer light. Somewhere nearby a flag fluttered against a metal pole. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the sky before looking back at him. Her composure never cracked. "Officer," she said gently, "if there's a concern, I'd be happy to provide a contact number." Daniel let out a short laugh. "A contact number?" "Yes." "For who?" The office expecting this delivery. A few people exchanged looks. Daniel shook his head. The whole story sounded impossible. An elementary school teacher driving an old SUV. A mysterious flag-covered box. A military destination. None of it fit together. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "until we determine exactly what's happening here, nobody is going anywhere." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. Not in defeat. More like disappointment. When she looked back up, the sadness in her expression lasted only a moment before disappearing behind dignity. "Then please make one phone call," she said. The gas station fell strangely quiet. Daniel stared at her. "To who?" Evelyn's fingers brushed the wedding ring on her left hand. The gesture was small enough that almost nobody noticed it. Almost nobody except the elderly veteran standing near Pump 4. "To the Pentagon," she replied. For the first time all afternoon, complete silence settled over the station. Evelyn's words lingered beneath the gas station canopy long after she stopped speaking. Nobody moved for a moment. The breeze carried the faint smell of gasoline and hot asphalt across the parking lot, while dozens of curious eyes shifted between her and Sergeant Daniel Rhodes. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle passed on the highway, its engine fading into the afternoon heat. Daniel stared at her as if he was trying to decide whether she was serious or simply testing his patience. The Pentagon. The request sounded so absurd that several people exchanged amused looks. One young man, near the convenience store in trance, actually laughed before quickly looking away. Daniel folded his arms tighter across his chest. The Pentagon, he repeated. That is your answer? Evelyn nodded once. Yes, sir. Her voice remained calm. No challenge. No attitude. Just certainty. Daniel studied her face. He had expected nervousness by now. Maybe frustration. Most people became defensive when questioned in public. Evelyn did neither. She simply stood beside her old SUV, her cardigan moving gently in the breeze, her eyes steady and composed. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The vehicle itself hardly matched the story she was telling. It was nearly 10 years old, with more than 100,000 miles on the odometer. There were faint scratches near the rear bumper. A faded school parking permit sat in one corner of the windshield. Nothing about it suggested government importance. Nothing about the woman standing beside it suggested connections to powerful institutions. She looked like exactly what she was. A teacher. Someone who spent her days helping children learn multiplication tables and reading assignments. Someone ordinary. Yet something about her refusal to panic kept pulling at Daniel's attention. What exactly do you do for a living, Miss Carter? He asked. I teach 4th grade. A few people nearby glanced at each other. The answer seemed to confirm what everyone already believed. Daniel nodded slowly. 4th grade. Yes, sir. And you expect me to believe the Pentagon is waiting for a delivery from a 4th grade teacher? Evelyn glanced toward the wooden case inside the SUV. For the first time, a shadow crossed her expression. Not fear. Concern. Almost protectiveness. They are expecting the delivery, she replied quietly. That is all I can say. Daniel followed her gaze toward the flag-covered case. The old veteran standing near Pump 4 noticed it too. He had remained silent since arriving at the station, but now his weathered eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Unlike everyone else, he was not looking at Evelyn. He was looking at the flag. The way it was folded. The way it rested across the polished wood beneath it. Something about it seemed familiar. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. Her hand brushed the edge of her wedding ring again. The movement came naturally, almost unconsciously. It was a habit she had developed over the years whenever she found herself in uncomfortable situations. Situations where assumptions arrived before facts. Situations where strangers decided who she was before asking her name. She remembered another afternoon years earlier. A parent conference. A school fundraiser. A formal military event where people had mistaken her for staff before realizing she was a guest. The memories surfaced for only a second before disappearing. Experience had taught her something important. Dignity lasted longer than anger. Daniel stepped closer. If there is nothing suspicious happening here, then opening the box should not be a problem. Evelyn met his eyes. I cannot do that. Cannot or will not. Cannot. The answer came immediately. Firm but respectful. The distinction irritated him. Behind him, one of the younger officers shifted uneasily. He had begun wondering whether the situation was becoming more complicated than it first appeared. Daniel noticed the hesitation and immediately doubled down. Confidence was part of leadership. Doubt spread quickly if allowed to grow. Then we are going to sort this out right here, he said. Evelyn inhaled slowly. The afternoon sun emerged from behind the clouds, casting warm light across the parking lot. Reflections danced across the windows of the convenience store. For a brief moment, everything looked strangely peaceful despite the tension hanging in the air. Then Evelyn spoke again. Sergeant Rhodes. It was the first time she had used his name. Daniel looked up. What? You seem like a man who takes pride in doing things correctly. The statement caught him off guard. I do. Evelyn nodded. Then please make sure whatever happens next is based on facts. The words were not a threat. They were not even criticism. Somehow that made them harder to dismiss. Daniel opened his mouth to respond when a sudden vibration broke the silence. One of the patrol radios crackled to life. Every officer nearby instinctively turned toward the sound. The radio transmission burst through the afternoon air with a sharp crackle that instantly pulled attention away from Evelyn and toward the patrol car. The younger officer closest to the vehicle reached for the microphone. "Unit 12 receiving," he said. Static filled the speaker for a moment before a voice from dispatch came through again, clearer this time. "Unit 12, confirm you are currently at the Highway 41 service station." The officer glanced toward Daniel. "Affirmative." Another pause followed. The kind of pause that felt longer than it really was. Several people standing nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Even the teenager holding the fountain drink remained frozen beside the entrance. "Dispatch requests verification of a vehicle registered to Evelyn Marie Carter." Daniel's expression hardened. "That would be the SUV," he said. The officer relayed the information. More static followed. Then another voice entered the transmission. Not dispatch this time. Someone else. Someone higher up. The tone was calm but urgent. "Do not leave the channel." Daniel frowned. That was unusual. Very unusual. He stepped closer to the patrol car. "What is going on?" Nobody answered immediately. Evelyn remained standing exactly where she had been. Her posture never changed. The wind stirred a few loose strands of hair near her face. She looked tired more than anything else. Tired of being questioned. Tired of being judged. Tired of waiting for people to discover things she already knew. The veteran near pump 4 slowly approached the edge of the gathering crowd. His eyes drifted once more toward the wooden case inside the SUV. Something about it continued to bother him. Not in a suspicious way. In a familiar way. Then he noticed a small brass plate attached to one corner of the case. The sunlight caught it for a brief second. He could not read the inscription from where he stood, but the sight alone caused his expression to change. Daniel noticed the veteran staring. "Sir, please remain back." The older man nodded politely, but did not move far. Years of military service had taught him when a situation deserved attention. This was becoming one of those situations. Another transmission came through the radio. This time the voice sounded noticeably more serious. "Sergeant Rhodes, are you available on scene?" Daniel stepped forward and took the microphone himself. "This is Rhodes. Remain where you are. A supervisor is requesting direct contact." The statement landed heavily. Supervisors did not normally involve themselves in routine stops at gas stations. Daniel looked around. Cameras were still recording. Customers were still watching. The entire situation felt increasingly uncomfortable. "Requesting contact regarding what?" he asked. Silence followed. Then came the answer. "Regarding Ms. Carter." For the first time since arriving, Daniel glanced directly at Evelyn without speaking. She simply met his gaze. No triumph. No satisfaction. Nothing except patience. The response unsettled him. Most people would have seized the moment. Most people would have pointed out that they had been right. Evelyn did neither. A dark sedan turned into the station parking lot and rolled slowly past the fuel pumps. The driver seemed to notice the crowd and immediately parked. Near the convenience store, more eyes joined the growing audience. The atmosphere had changed completely now. What began as curiosity was becoming something else. Anticipation. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant Rhodes, additional verification has been requested through federal channels." Daniel blinked. "Federal channels?" "Affirmative." He looked back at Evelyn. "What exactly is in that vehicle?" Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward the wooden case. When she spoke, her voice was almost gentle. "A promise." The answer only deepened the confusion around him. Yet somehow it sounded sincere. The veteran near pump 4 closed his eyes for a moment. A promise. He had heard military families use that word before. Not about objects. Not about property. About honor. About duty. About remembering. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the folded flag inside the SUV. At that exact moment, another radio transmission arrived. The officer holding the receiver suddenly straightened. His face lost all color. Slowly he looked toward Daniel. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "you need to hear this yourself." The younger officer swallowed hard before handing the radio to Daniel. The crowd watched every movement now. The casual curiosity that had filled the gas station minutes earlier had disappeared, replaced by a silence that seemed to settle over the concrete like a heavy blanket. Daniel pressed the receiver to his ear. Rhodes speaking. A calm voice answered immediately. It was not dispatch. It was not a local supervisor. The tone carried the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Sergeant Rhodes, This is Deputy Director Alan Mercer from the Regional Federal Coordination Office. I need you to answer a question carefully. Daniel straightened instinctively. Yes, sir. Is Ms. Evelyn Carter currently on scene? Daniel glanced toward her. She remained beside the SUV, hands folded, standing quietly beneath the afternoon sun. Yes, sir. A pause followed. Has the transport case been opened? No, sir. Another pause. Longer this time. Good. Daniel felt a strange knot forming in his stomach. Around him, nobody could hear the other side of the conversation, but they could see his expression changing. The confidence that had defined him since arriving was beginning to crack. Sergeant, Mercer continued, you are instructed to ensure that neither the vehicle nor the transport case is disturbed until authorized personnel arrive. Daniel frowned. Authorized personnel? They are already en route. The words landed heavily. Nearby, the veteran at Pump 4 slowly removed his cap. His eyes never left the folded flag resting inside the SUV. Something was becoming clear to him now. Something the others still did not understand. Daniel lowered his voice. Sir, what exactly is this? For the first time, Mercer hesitated. The details are restricted. However, I can confirm that Ms. Carter is operating under official authorization. Daniel looked toward Evelyn again. She was watching him calmly. Not smug. Not victorious. Simply patient. It was the patience of someone who had spent years waiting for people to catch up to the truth. Sir, Daniel said carefully. She identified herself as a teacher. That is correct. Then why is federal coordination involved? Mercer answered without hesitation. Because not every mission belongs to someone wearing a uniform. The sentence lingered in Daniel's mind. Behind him, one of the officers shifted nervously. The flashing patrol lights suddenly felt excessive. The crowd felt larger. The cameras felt closer. Mercer spoke again. I strongly recommend that Ms. Carter be treated with the respect her responsibilities warrant. Then the line went silent. Daniel slowly lowered the radio. Nobody spoke. Even the sounds of traffic seemed distant. The younger officer looked at him. Sergeant. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes moved toward the wooden case. Then toward Evelyn. Then back toward the case again. For the first time, uncertainty outweighed certainty. Across the parking lot, the veteran finally stepped forward. Officer, he said quietly. Daniel turned. What is it, sir? The older man pointed gently toward the folded flag. I served 32 years. His voice carried the steady weight of experience. I have attended more military ceremonies than I can count. Several. People listened carefully. That flag is folded a very specific way. Daniel looked toward the SUV. And the veteran took a slow breath. And people do not transport something like that unless it matters deeply. His gaze shifted toward Evelyn. Very deeply. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. The sunlight reflected off her wedding ring again. For the first time, sadness appeared clearly on her face. Not fear. Not frustration. Grief. Quiet grief carried with dignity. Daniel noticed it immediately. The realization unsettled him more than the federal call had. Whatever was happening here was no longer about suspicion. It was about something important that he did not yet understand. Then a distant sound rolled across the highway. Low at first, almost unnoticeable. Several people looked toward the horizon. The sound grew steadily louder. Engines. Multiple engines. Approaching fast. Heads turned toward the road leading into the station. The veteran looked up. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, and Daniel felt his pulse quicken as a convoy of dark government vehicles appeared in the distance, moving directly toward them. The convoy reached the gas station less than a minute later. 4 dark sport utility vehicles rolled across the parking lot with quiet precision, their polished surfaces reflecting the flashing blue lights from the patrol cars. Nobody spoke as the vehicles came to a stop. Doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women in formal government attire stepped out first, followed by several military personnel whose calm professionalism immediately changed the atmosphere. The crowd instinctively moved back. Phones remained raised, but conversations disappeared. Sergeant Daniel Rhodes felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him as a tall officer wearing the insignia of a colonel approached. The colonel did not look angry. He looked focused. That somehow felt worse. His gaze moved from the patrol vehicles to the SUV and finally to Evelyn Carter. The moment he saw her, his expression softened. Mrs. Carter, he said respectfully. We apologize for the delay. Evelyn nodded politely. Thank you for coming. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it landed. Like thunder across the station. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The colonel knew her. Not casually. Not professionally. Personally. With respect. The kind of respect earned over years, not minutes. The colonel then turned toward Daniel. Sergeant Rhodes? Yes, sir. I am Colonel Richard Hayes. He extended a hand. Daniel shook it automatically. I understand there has been some confusion. The word confusion felt generous. Daniel glanced toward the gathered crowd. Nothing about the situation felt simple anymore. Colonel, he said carefully, nobody identified the nature of the transport. Hayes nodded. That is because they were not authorized to. His answer was firm, but not hostile. The colonel then walked toward the rear of Evelyn's SUV. Every person in the parking lot seemed to hold their breath. Even the veteran near pump 4 stood motionless. Hayes stopped beside the open hatch and looked at the flag-covered case. For a brief moment, his posture changed. His shoulders lowered slightly. His expression became solemn, almost reverent. Then he looked back at Evelyn. Has the case been disturbed? No, she replied. Good. The colonel exhaled quietly. Behind him, another government official stepped forward carrying a secure folder. Daniel noticed multiple signatures stamped across the front. Federal seals. Military seals. Authorization markings he had never seen before. The official handed the folder to Hayes. The colonel opened it, verified several pages, then closed it again. Everything appeared routine to them. Yet every action made the mystery deeper for everyone else. Finally, the veteran spoke. His voice carried across the silence. Colonel, was someone lost? The question drew every eye toward him. Hayes turned slowly. For the first time, emotion appeared on his face. Not official professionalism. Human emotion. Respect. Yes, sir, Hayes answered quietly. Someone extraordinary. The parking lot became completely still. Evelyn lowered her gaze. Her hand rested over her wedding ring again. The afternoon sunlight reflected softly from the diamond before fading beneath a passing cloud. Daniel watched her carefully. He suddenly understood that the sadness he had seen earlier was not frustration. It was grief. Deep grief carried with remarkable grace. Hayes stepped beside her. Mrs. Carter has been entrusted with delivering personal honors and memorial items connected to one of the most distinguished military leaders of this generation. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Distinguished military leader, he repeated. The colonel looked directly at him. Yes. Then came another pause. A deliberate pause. The kind that changes everything. 4-star General Nathan Carter. The words hit the station like a wave. Several people gasped. The teenager with the fountain drink nearly dropped it. The veteran removed his cap completely and held it against his chest. Daniel stared at Evelyn in disbelief. Every strange detail suddenly rearranged itself into a picture he had never considered. The military contacts. The federal coordination. The protected transport. The confidence. The dignity. The ring. Hayes continued speaking. General Carter dedicated more than 30 years to serving this nation. Mrs. Carter has been carrying out a responsibility connected to his final wishes. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Daniel could barely hear the traffic anymore. His mind kept returning to one fact. The woman he had doubted from the moment he arrived had never once raised her voice. Never once demanded special treatment. Never once revealed who she was. She had only asked for one phone call. And now, standing beneath the fading afternoon sun, surrounded by federal officials and military officers, Sergeant Daniel Rhodes realized just how much that single phone call would have changed. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The gas station seemed suspended in time, as if the entire world had paused to absorb what had just been revealed. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the polished government vehicles, but even those rhythmic bursts of color felt muted now. Sergeant Daniel Rhodes stood motionless beside his cruiser. The confidence that had carried him through countless situations was gone. In its place was a growing awareness that he had never truly understood the woman standing in front of him. Evelyn Carter remained exactly where she had been from the beginning. She did not step forward. She did not seek attention. She did not correct the crowd or remind anyone that she had been telling the truth all along. Instead, she quietly walked toward the rear of her SUV. The movement drew every eye. Colonel Hayes stepped aside respectfully as she approached the flag-covered case. Her fingers rested gently on the polished wood. The simple touch transformed the object from a mystery into something deeply personal. The afternoon breeze moved softly across the parking lot. Somewhere beyond the station, wind stirred through a row of pine trees lining the highway. Evelyn lowered her head for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan always hated attention. A faint smile appeared on her face before fading again. He would probably laugh if he saw all of this. The sadness behind the words settled over the crowd. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. Even the people holding phones seemed unsure whether they should continue recording. Colonel Hayes looked toward the folded flag. His expression carried the same mixture of respect and loss. "The general spoke about you often," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded but kept her eyes on the case. "He spoke about all of you too." The colonel looked away for a moment. The emotion in his face became harder to hide. Daniel watched the exchange carefully. For the first time all day, he was not thinking about procedures or reports. He was thinking about the human cost hidden behind titles and uniforms. He had heard the words four-star general and immediately imagined power, influence, authority. Yet standing here now, he saw something entirely different. A widow carrying out a promise. A woman driving alone across the state because something important needed to reach its destination. Nothing about her dignity came from rank. It came from character. The veteran near Pump 4 slowly approached. His cap remained pressed against his chest. "Ma'am," he said gently. Evelyn turned toward him. "Yes, sir." The old man smiled sadly. "I never had the honor of meeting your husband." He glanced toward the flag. "But I think I would have liked him." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You would have." The veteran nodded. "And I think he would have been proud of how you handled today." A long silence followed. The kind of silence that did not feel empty. The kind that carried meaning all on its own. Evelyn looked down at her wedding ring. The diamond caught a final beam of sunlight as the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. "Nathan used to tell young officers something," she said. Several people leaned forward slightly. He said the easiest way to measure a person was not by how they treated important people. It was by how they treated ordinary people. Daniel felt the words hit harder than anything else he had heard all day. He looked away toward the pavement. The concrete beneath his boots suddenly seemed very interesting. Anything to avoid the weight of that realization. Evelyn did not say the words to shame anyone. That made them even more powerful. The breeze lifted the corner of the folded flag for a brief moment before it settled again. The parking lot remained completely still. And as the first shadows of evening stretched across the fuel pumps, Sergeant Daniel Rhodes began to understand that the most important lesson of the day had nothing to do with military ranks, government authority, or federal calls. It had everything to do with the quiet dignity of a woman who never once demanded respect, yet somehow earned the respect of everyone around her. The silence that followed felt different now. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence that comes when people realize they have witnessed something important. The evening sun hung lower above the horizon, painting long golden reflections across the windows of the gas station. Colonel Hayes checked his watch before turning toward one of the government officials standing nearby. The official nodded and opened the secure folder once more. Several documents were removed and handed carefully to Evelyn. She accepted them with both hands. Daniel noticed the respect in every movement. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was casual. Everything seemed guided by purpose. "Mrs. Carter," Hayes said softly, "the dedication ceremony has been delayed." Evelyn looked surprised. "Delayed?" The colonel nodded. "By direct order." A murmur spread through the crowd. Even Daniel found himself leaning slightly forward. "There was a unanimous request from the command staff," Hayes continued. "They refused to begin without you." Evelyn blinked. For the first time all day she appeared genuinely caught off guard. That was not necessary. Hayes smiled faintly. According to them, it was. The colonel then turned toward the gathering of civilians. Most were still holding phones, though few seemed interested in recording anymore. They were listening now, truly listening. Many people knew General Carter as a military leader, Hayes said. But those of us who served with him knew something else. He glanced toward Evelyn. He often said that his greatest achievement was not a mission, a promotion, or a medal. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She already knew what was coming. He said it was convincing a remarkable fourth-grade teacher to marry him. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. The tension finally eased. Several people smiled. Even the veteran chuckled quietly. Evelyn shook her head with a mixture of embarrassment and affection. That sounds exactly like him. Hayes nodded. He told that story constantly. The colonel's smile faded into something more thoughtful. What most people never knew was how much of his success came from your influence. Daniel watched Evelyn carefully. She seemed uncomfortable receiving praise. She shifted her attention toward the flag-covered case instead. Yet Hayes continued. When officers struggled, they called the general. When the general struggled, he called you. The words landed gently but powerfully. Daniel felt another piece of the story fall into place. He had spent the entire afternoon viewing Evelyn through the lens of someone else's title, someone else's accomplishments. Yet every person arriving on scene seemed determined to honor her, not because of who she married, but because of who she was. One of the younger officers quietly approached Daniel. "Sergeant," he whispered, "we really got this wrong." Daniel stared at the pavement for a moment before answering. Yes. It was the simplest response he had given all day, and the most honest. Across the lot, the veteran stepped closer to Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you." Evelyn looked surprised. "For what?" The old man smiled. "For carrying the weight after he could not." The statement struck the crowd harder than any official announcement. For a brief moment, emotion appeared in Evelyn's eyes. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. She looked toward the evening sky, took a slow breath, and gently rested her hand on the polished wooden case. "He carried all of us," she said quietly. "I am only helping him finish the journey." No one spoke after that. The breeze moved softly through the station. The flag remained still, and as the last light of day settled across the parking lot, every person standing there understood that the most remarkable individual in the story had never been the decorated general whose name commanded respect across the nation. It was the woman who carried his legacy with grace when nobody was watching. The evening air had cooled noticeably by the time preparations to leave began. The crowd that had gathered throughout the afternoon remained surprisingly quiet. Nobody seemed eager to leave. It was as if everyone understood they had become witnesses to something larger than a misunderstanding at a gas station. Colonel Hayes carefully reviewed the final documents while government personnel secured the transport arrangements. The folded flag remained resting atop the polished wooden case, illuminated by the soft amber glow of the station lights that had just flickered on. Evelyn stood nearby, her hands folded in front of her. The exhaustion of the day showed in her eyes, yet her posture remained steady. She had carried herself with the same grace from the first moment to the last. Sergeant Daniel Rhodes watched from several yards away. The weight in his chest had only grown heavier as the afternoon unfolded. He had spent years believing experience gave him the ability to read people quickly. Today had challenged that belief more than any training course or departmental review ever could. Finally, he took a slow breath and walked toward Evelyn. The movement immediately caught the attention of several people nearby. Colonel Hayes glanced up but said nothing. The veteran near the pumps quietly removed his hands from his pockets and watched. Daniel stopped a respectful distance away. For a moment, he struggled to find the words. The station lights reflected softly across the pavement between them. "Mrs. Carter," he said at last. Evelyn turned toward him. "Yes, Sergeant." Daniel looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I owe you an apology." The parking lot grew even quieter. "When I arrived, I made assumptions." He paused. "I thought I understood the situation before I understood the person standing in front of me." Evelyn listened without interruption. "I did not give you the respect every citizen deserves." Daniel swallowed. "And for that, I am sincerely sorry." The words were simple, honest. Nothing more, nothing less. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then Evelyn smiled gently. It was not a triumphant smile. It was not the smile of someone enjoying another person's discomfort. It was the smile of someone who understood how difficult it can be to admit a mistake. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "You have every reason to be angry." Evelyn looked toward the flag-covered case before answering. "Nathan used to tell me something." Daniel listened carefully. "He said that character is not measured by whether someone makes mistakes." She looked back at him. "It is measured by what they do after they realize they made one." The words settled over him like a weight lifting from his shoulders. Colonel Hayes smiled faintly. The veteran nodded in approval. Several members of the crowd quietly lowered their phones. Something important had happened. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not revenge. Something rarer. Accountability met with grace. Daniel exhaled slowly. Your husband sounds like he was a remarkable man. Evelyn's eyes drifted toward the evening sky. He was. Then her smile widened slightly. But he would have wanted me to remind you that he was not always right. A few people laughed softly. Even Daniel smiled. For the first time all day, the tension fully disappeared. One of the government officials approached the group. Mrs. Carter, we are ready. Evelyn nodded. She placed her hand gently on the polished wooden case one final time before the transport team carefully secured it inside a waiting vehicle. The movements were deliberate and respectful. Nothing rushed. Nothing careless. As the vehicle doors closed, the veteran stepped forward once more. He raised his cap slightly toward Evelyn. Several others followed his example in their own way. No one had instructed them to do it. The gesture came naturally. Respect freely given. Evelyn looked around the station one final time. At the officers. At the veteran. At the strangers who had unknowingly become part of an unforgettable day. Then she smiled and quietly said, "Thank you all for helping him continue the journey." The convoy departed just after sunset. One by one, the dark vehicles pulled away from the gas station and disappeared down the highway, their taillights shrinking into the distance until they became tiny red specks against the evening horizon. The crowd slowly dispersed afterward. Conversations remained hushed. People climbed into their cars carrying something they had not arrived with that afternoon. Perspective. The veteran was among the last to leave. Before stepping into his pickup truck, he looked once more toward the road where Evelyn had disappeared. Then he placed his cap back on his head and drove away in silence. The station gradually returned to normal. Customers came and went. Fuel pumps clicked. Traffic rolled past beneath the glow of streetlights. Yet for Sergeant Daniel Rhodes, nothing felt normal anymore. He remained standing near his patrol vehicle long after everyone else had gone. The flashing lights had been turned off. The radios had fallen quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of interstate traffic and the occasional rustle of wind moving through nearby trees. He looked across the empty section of pavement where Evelyn's SUV had been parked only hours earlier. The space seemed strangely significant now. Earlier that day, he had seen an old vehicle, a folded flag, and a woman he believed he understood. By nightfall, he had learned how wrong assumptions could be. Daniel reached into his pocket and removed a small notebook he carried for work. He opened it slowly beneath the glow of a parking lot light. The blank page stared back at him. For several seconds, he simply stood there thinking. Then he wrote a single sentence. Facts first. Assumptions never. He stared at the words for a moment before closing the notebook. Across the state, the convoy continued its journey. Inside one of the vehicles, Evelyn sat quietly beside the polished wooden case. The highway lights passed across the window in soft golden streaks. She rested one hand gently on the flag-covered surface. Outside, the night stretched endlessly ahead. For the first time all day, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The exhaustion settled over her shoulders. So did the memories. She remembered meeting Nathan years ago at a school event. She remembered his terrible jokes, his impossible optimism, and his habit of treating every person he met as though they mattered. Most of all, she remembered his belief that kindness was never weakness. It was strength, real strength, the kind that remained when titles disappeared and uniforms were folded away. A faint smile touched her face. Through the reflection in the window, she could almost imagine him sitting beside her, smiling that familiar smile. The convoy continued through the darkness. Miles passed quietly beneath the tires. Eventually, the lights of the destination appeared in the distance. But before they arrived, Evelyn looked down at her wedding ring one last time. The diamond reflected a tiny point of light from the dashboard. She brushed it gently with her thumb and whispered, "We made it." Outside, the American flag mounted near the entrance of a distant military facility moved softly in the night breeze. Inside the vehicle, Evelyn sat peacefully beside the promise she had carried across the state. No applause followed. No speeches waited. No dramatic ending arrived. Only a quiet road, a faithful heart, and the kind of dignity that leaves an impression long after people forget the details. Somewhere behind her, a gas station returned to ordinary life. Somewhere ahead, a final promise was about to be fulfilled. And between those two places remained a simple truth that everyone who witnessed the day would remember for years to come. The value of a person is never revealed by their title, their appearance, or the assumptions of strangers. It is revealed by their character when no one is looking. The night wind moved gently across the highway. The stars shone above, and the journey continued in silence.